This video, I'm going to be giving you your feedback on the chapter discussion based on week 12's reading about the Renaissance. The first question was it a new era or a continuation of the Middle Ages? The traditional view tends to stress that it's new, or if not entirely new, it is based on the ancient world of Greece and Rome. Either way, the Middle Ages is kind of ignored and seen as a backwards period from which the Renaissance emerged. People who stress the difference, the newness of the Renaissance, stress things like a more secular, non-religious outlook to life, a sense of individualism, a revival of interest in ancient Greece and Rome, and more realism in art. But we could point out that all of these things are developing in the Middle Ages. For example, the idea of a more secular approach of humanism. Medieval universities taught the liberal arts. Medieval universities were not focused just on religion. They believed that a man should study things like mathematics, astronomy, um, grammar. I'm forgetting off the top of my head what the seven liberal arts were. But the point is, none of them were theology, none of them were the study of religion. And the intellectual world of the Middle Ages grows into the world of the Renaissance. Likewise, the claim that an interest in the ancient world is unique to the Renaissance ignores the fact that in the Middle Ages, Latin, the language of the Romans, was the language of communication in the church and in law and in the universities. And the idea that realism in art is new to the Renaissance. Again, Renaissance style of art grows out of medieval styles of art. If I were better with graphics, I would show you some examples here, but we'll just have to imagine it. Some high medieval art in the 13th and 14th centuries is clearly identifiable as the origin of greater realism. If you want to look up Giotto, Giotto, he's a good example of an early Renaissance, or is it a late medieval artist in the early 1300s, showing this transition into the Renaissance. The second question asked, what causes lay behind the development of the Renaissance? Well, I could simply say Italy and the world of the merchant-based Italian city-states. Italy was a world of great wealth which could be spent on art, and great wealth in particular that was in money form easily available, unlike the landed wealth of the old feudal aristocracy. Italy as a merchant centre was open to ideas coming in along the trade routes from the Byzantine world, from the Muslim world. Italy also, because it was a society based on merchant or manufacturers' city-states rather than aristocratic feudalism, was a world where a sense of individualism was greater. You as an individual mattered more in a world of merchants and manufacturers where you could get ahead through your own enterprise than it did in the feudal world where you were who you were because your father was that before you, etc., etc. And also the economy, it's been argued, was rebounding after the Black Death. The Black Death marks a low point in European history. After that, the population is growing again, the economy is rebounding, and that wealth can now be put into the art of the Renaissance. The last question asked, what new developments occurred in culture and politics in the Renaissance? This is a really huge question. I could speak for hours on this. I'll just keep it basic. In culture, we see greater realism in art, what is called linear perspective, the ability to portray the world realistically and make it look three-dimensional on a two-dimensional canvas, is an invention of the Renaissance. Humanism, that is philosophy and writing based on a study of the humanities, things like history, literature, and philosophy, rather than based on theology, based on religious matters, is usually seen as a major contribution of the Renaissance, although, as I've argued, that grows out of the Middle Ages. We see a revival in Greek and classical Latin. Greek was largely forgotten in the West in the Middle Ages. In the Renaissance, Greek is rediscovered, partly because Greek scholars are coming from the former Byzantine Empire to Italy. And also classical Latin, as opposed to the Latin of the Middle Ages. People want to go back to the style of Roman writers like Cicero, who was particularly admired for his ability to use the Latin language. He was famous as a public speaker. In politics, we see the emergence of what we could see as the origins of the modern state. Old feudal systems are being replaced by the city-states in Italy, by the so-called new monarchies in Western Europe, where the king has greater degree of power and authority and standardization within his kingdom. It's been argued that the whole emphasis on education in the Renaissance is basically about training administrators for the king's court or for the court of the princes who are emerging out of the old merchant republics in Italy. We see things like, for example, professional diplomats. A few of you mentioned this in your discussions. People who are trained specifically to represent a king or a ruler at the court of another ruler. And in political ideas, we see the ideas of Machiavelli, who has a very realistic view of politics rather than an idealistic one. He sees politics as the art of getting things done, in many ways the origin of the modern idea of politics. He argues it is better for a ruler to be feared than to be loved. All the good things that a ruler can do for his people, he can only do if the ruler is powerful enough to maintain peace and order within his state and to defend it against foreign enemies.